Yeah. Hey, everybody, welcome to this episode of Think Business Live. I'm looking forward to talking with Ryan Estes. Ryan is the co-founder of Kitcaster. And what we're going to be talking about today is basically how to get on a podcast. And Ryan and his team are great at that. So, Ryan, I'm a huge believer in podcasts. Between this podcast and a sales podcast that I used to have and a podcast that I had to promote my book, I have almost 900 episodes live and recorded. I probably have another couple hundred. And I'm a huge believer in the podcast platform. And I'm really a big believer that podcasts are one of the greatest ways to grow your business, grow your market share, grow your connection with people, because you can have conversations on podcasts that you just can't have even at a meeting. And so, I want to rewind to kind of understand your backstory of getting people on podcasts. And, because right now everybody's thinking, should I get a podcast? But before we go there, as co-founder of Kitcaster, which is a company that basically books people on podcasts, how did this business come about?
You bet. Appreciate being here, John.
Yeah, appreciate being here.
900 plus episodes. You're my people. That's incredible. I love that.
Well, and you actually book a lot of people on my show, your team, which I really, really appreciate. It's interesting. When I hit 100 episodes on this podcast, I started getting booking agencies all over the world and booking people. And it's a blast. I meet people. I meet the greatest people. It's like a mini master's class for me. But talk about you. So kind of how did we get here?
You bet. So I started podcasting probably 10 years ago. Around the same time, I started a media and marketing agency called Talk Launch. That was, I guess, what would become social media marketing. But this was kind of before Instagram, before the Facebook Business Manager, and was kicking that business off in contrast to a waning musical career. I had 2 young children and was basically looking to do something new. So I started podcasts, started a digital marketing agency. And I really found that podcasting was a way for me to reconnect with my friends and with professional relationships. And originally, my podcast was based about music, and so I could connect with some of my musical friends.
Yeah,
fell in love with it. Flash forward a couple of years, agency's doing well. Decided to launch the Denver Business Podcast as a means to kind of answer some questions professionally, but also to no, Kitty, how dare you? Answer some professional questions, but also, I suppose, come here.
There we go.
Stay down, baby. So I started the Denver Business Podcast, recorded 300 plus episodes. In the process, met my co-founder, Brandy, who had an HR company in Denver, and she put some of her startup clients on my podcast. Had a great time doing it. We kind of clicked. A couple of years ago, we're sitting down for coffee, like, hey, we get along. Let's do a project,
Yeah.
And I'm obviously very passionate about podcasting. I wanted to do something there. So we started kind of rattling through some different opportunities in podcasting. Software has always been our goal, but wanted to start with a service. We like the kind of let's do a service product and then wrap a SaaS product around a problem we're finding.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of service opportunities in podcasting and a lot of moving parts, but we felt the best opportunity for us to scale a product, service in this case, would be a booking agency. We thought that the space was ripe for it, particularly where we play, which is startups, funded startup founders, successful entrepreneurs with multiple exits. They have a story to tell. We could put them on these podcasts. Largely for a service like that, the way you scale it is butts and seats. So developing a culture and, hiring people and getting enthusiasm and momentum behind the service is really what we wanted to do. So, 2 years later, I think we're doing a bang up job of that.
Right.
I think, I think plenty of room to grow. So,
yeah, well, the market is so much room to grow. Let's talk about what makes a good podcast, right? Because I don't know if there's really an answer to that, because I think there's an audience for every podcast. But what are some of the recipes for what makes a good podcast? And really, I think almost maybe my question before that, Ryan, is how do people get over this? Because I think this is a pain point for people to actually do podcasts. And then we'll get into why be on podcasts. I think people have an idea to do a podcast, but then they're too nervous because they feel like the space is overcrowded, or they feel like nobody will want to listen to them. And so from starting a podcast, what do you tell people, why they should have their own podcasts?
I think it's just in some people. Ultimately, if like you're a talker, you're going to love this. For me to start any kind of project, it's got to kind of pass a personal validation. So it's got to be fun. To me, podcasting is a blast. I love to do it. It's got to be of service, so I feel like it's just more meaningful if you're helping other people. That might attribute to why people choose certain topics in podcasting. And then it's got to make money. So that might be a qualifier for some things, because, the reality with podcasting is it's going to take a while to monetize a podcast most of the time. There's some outliers, of course. So someone's considering getting into podcasting, do something of service, make sure it's fun to you. And then the one piece of advice I would say is don't judge your podcast or even try to make any money on it until the 100th episode. Like, give yourself some runway here to have fun and experiment with the medium a little bit. I think a lot of great podcasts fall by the wayside because everybody has imposter syndrome. Everybody feels like, why should I do this? Right. But if you're enjoying it, give yourself that time to have fun,
Yeah. And I would say don't get lost in the downloads or the views or anything. Just enjoy it. And if it's in alignment, then that's great. So having a podcast is one thing. And then there's the beauty of being actually a guest on a podcast. And I think that's really important too. And it's to me, you've got people have credentials, and then there's credibility. And being a guest on a podcast, or being guest on many podcasts, helps build your credibility. And that's one of the things that you guys do. And so talk about just kind of the mindset of why it's important to be on other people's podcasts, interviewed by other people.
Yeah, that's a good point. Why is it important? I think having a good time is important in business. There's not a lot of times you get wins. To me, podcasting is winning. I think another is it helps you focus into what you're really doing. Kind of being interviewed, you have an opportunity to review, like, hey, I'm going to probably tell these 3-4 anecdotes over and over again. You can kind of weaponize those over time, is create a really compelling story for yourself. And then also kind of prioritize what you want to be talking about. So wherever you are in business, we work a lot with entrepreneurs. So they're either validating, finding traction, or scaling. There are going to be challenges in there, and I think some of us work those challenges out best talking. Some people can write, and enjoy a white piece of paper. But I think it's a lot easier to kind of talk yourself into a solution often than writing it. Maybe you land up in a more real position by just talking about it.
Yeah. Well, I think, there's such a high percentage of people who also listen on their walks, listen in their cars, listen, while they multitask interviews. And a lot of times I think I think most people have a lot of humility and don't want to talk about themselves, but when asked a question, then it's heard in such a different manner. And so to me, I think companies like yours are so important to get people exposure to companies and within an interview that can be repurposed a ton of different ways. So can you talk a little bit about how when you get somebody interviewed on a podcast, how that person can then repurpose that interview and use it really long term for so many reasons, whether it's to grow their business, use as a recruiting tool. I mean, there's so many different tentacles to it.
So true. And it's a good consideration too. And what we spend a lot of time with is like, how are the people going to be listening to this podcast? Because like you said, they're going to be on the treadmill, they're going to be doing dishes. But also they probably found the podcast that you're going to go on to be a resource. All of the tools we make, all the SaaS dashboards and platforms we make have all been, all the designers do the best they can to just put a high polish and scrub on it, so they all look the same. It's like, if you want to pick a SMS texting company, how can you differentiate? Podcast is going to give the founder an opportunity to kind of have a squishy connection with their audience. They got 45 minutes to talk about their product and what they do. I mean, if that doesn't sell it, then it's probably, not the product's fault.
Yeah.
So yeah, considering, the audience is important. What was the second part of your question? I forgot.
I can't even remember, but it was really just the importance of repurposing, like just repurposing is, you can use a podcast interview for years. I mean, the repurposing of it, I think, is huge.
Absolutely.
I mean, like when I'm interviewed on a podcast, I actually put those interviews on my own podcast.
That's smart. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah.
You could have a podcast of you just going on other people's podcasts. I mean, sky's the limit. Well, and also like in consideration of your audience, like you said, our clients, they're looking for prospects, let's move the needle where we can with business. They're looking for angel investors and finance opportunities often, they're looking for, like you said, talent, maybe they're doing recruiting and they're looking for networking opportunities with the podcast host.
Yeah.
So if you diversify the kind of podcasts you want, you can create these evergreen resources that if you go on a great show about venture capital and angel investing and really get into the numbers and the prospects for your business, you might be able to strip that down to 15 minutes of like really meaty material. So before going into your financing meeting, people have a chance to get to know you and also have kind of maybe a baseline understanding of your important numbers.
Yeah.
So that's huge. Also, if you have kind of a core offer and to really go into the pain points at depth of the customers, you have that now. So, top of funnel traffic from a podcast is amazing, but you can create these resources that people that are further along your funnel, it gets them closer to a sale because you can answer some of the questions they have. And they can also get to know you a little bit, which hopefully, helps that sales process.
Yeah. No, I love that. Let's talk about you, the business owner. How are you a different leader today, a year later, 1 year later with COVID than you were a year ago?
It's a good question. A year ago, there was 4 of us and now there's 14 of us. So we've been growing very, very quickly, which has been a real challenge. Our co-founder Brandy is phenomenal at finding talent and finding people for key positions. Because this kind of podcast booking is like, who knew that would exist? There's not really a model. So we're pulling from different models, whether that's a talent agency for music, different way of event coordinators, like what are the roles? So trying to find the roles to fill. And then from a leadership position, how do we manage people that are largely remote? There's maybe a half dozen of us that come to the office every couple of days, but a lot of people are remote. So how do we keep them engaged and feeling good about being on the team? Mental health concerns are affecting everybody. I think particularly a year in, it's just like we're in the back 9 of this thing and just like, that's been a big challenge. So I think finding ways to create space to have emotional reactions without being too heavy-handed with a reaction has been serving me pretty well in some areas I'm trying to grow.
Yeah, no, I love what you're talking about. It's pre-COVID studies, Ryan, were saying that by the year 2030, 85% of the jobs that exist don't exist today. And then COVID hits, and I think accelerated that 5-6 years.
Yeah.
But, if we look back 20 years, if we look back 10 years ago, would we have thought that there would even be a career of being a podcast booker, right? Where it would be in such not only high demand today, but really, I would say probably in high demand for the next 10, 20 years as podcasts become even more and more mainstream. Yeah. And so, when you look at your business, because I think, as I'm a business coach, I work with companies all over the country, from solopreneurs to Fortune 100 companies and everything in between. And when you go past 10, when you go from 9 to 10 employees, it's a total game changer, that one person managing people, leading people, culture building, et cetera. So how are you how are you building your culture as you continue to grow? So it still kind of, keeps the foundation of what you initially had with 4 people.
Yeah. It's constant attention on top of the remote work I guess on top of it as a necessary component, we do have a lot of digital communication, not a lot of face-to-face, quite a bit of phone calls, which is cool, but most of it's going to be emails and stuff, emails and Slack. And a lot of that can be misinterpreted. So I really, talk a lot about unconditional positive regard as being a baseline of operations. It's kind of Pollyanna-ish.
Yeah.
We all have our moments, but if we're coming from a place of unconditional positive regard, it sets the tone to our reaction to anything. Something weird comes in. It's like, how are we going to react to that? We're not going to be snarky. We're not going to use sarcasm. We're just going to address it with unconditional positivity.
Yeah.
Second half of that really is assuming positive intent, that I can come off weird on emails sometimes, and that's absolutely a misunderstanding of probably where I'm coming from. So if we just extend that to everybody we're talking with, somebody has a snippy email, somebody says something sideways on Slack, but if we can come with like assuming their positive intent, it's just going to be liberating for our own brains, because how much like confrontation and conflict do we have room for? Not very much. And if you're getting hundreds of emails a day, you're going to have to kind of let it roll. So at the basis of our culture really is a fundamental kind of like commitment to positivity, and then everything kind of rolls back from that, because obviously we don't live in an unconditionally positive world.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Good. I appreciate that. So, so let's talk about how many podcasts you need to be a guest on to really kind of build consistency. I think, sometimes, to me, the more podcasts you're on, the better. And so, but what do you recommend to your clients? Because I think a lot of times people say, well, I'm so busy. I don't have time for this. I don't have time for that. I don't have time for this. I don't have time for that. But I think this is something people have to start really paying attention to making time for. So what's your recommendation to clients as you're booking them and talking to them about those initial stages? I know you kind of, at your engagement level, when you get that deep understanding of your client, what are you suggesting to them?
You bet. Well, I'm with you. I've probably recorded 400 or so, so I say more the merrier. However, when we're building the product, no one can look at 900 podcasts.
No. How many recordings do you think somebody should, like, if I'm a client coming to you and I'm saying, and they say to you, how many, should they be on 2? Can you get me 2 interviews a month? How many interviews should people kind of think about as they grow their own business, to be a guest on a show?
Exactly. So we start with a 3-month term with 10 podcasts.
Okay.
And then move from there, probably to 3 per month. So basically every 10 days or so, you're recording an episode of a podcast, which seems to meld pretty well with pretty much everybody's calendar. You've got a free hour every 10 days in your schedule to record a show.
Yeah. That makes sense. And I never really ask about pricing, but when it comes to pricing, how should people be thinking about the investment of that? You don't have to give pricing because someone could listen to this in a year and your price has changed. So I don't want you to talk. They can call you for pricing, but how should somebody think of it as an investment and not an expense?
That's a good idea. I like the way you differentiated that there as an investment. The return question on podcasting is a tough one because it doesn't necessarily fit neatly in a spreadsheet. Right.
Well, it's like PR. Somebody could see something that you're in and call you a year later.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's so true. I mean, you're going to get prospects and leads for sure. And if that's valuable to you, great. But we really consider that kind of the cherry on top. It's like top of funnel traffic, great. But can you repurpose the content to move people along? Is it a closing tool for you? That's super valuable. And also just the personal and professional growth that comes from going on awesome podcasts like this.
Yeah.
And how is that going to like temper everything you're doing?
Yeah.
With attention to like kind of sharing your message, maybe figuring out what your message is entirely. Maybe
Yeah.
figuring out you don't like the projects you're working on. From a validation stance, I think it's really important for founders to get out there and lead from the front. You've got sales, you got marketing, they're all working hard on the product. This gives you opportunity maybe to kind of think into the future a little bit further.
Yeah, I agree. All right, Ryan, you ready for a quick speed round?
Yes.
All right. Favorite book and why?
Favorite book and why? I'm going to say On the Road, because I read a piece in the New Yorker this morning about Kerouac and On the Road, and it filled me full of great emotions. But I love the energy and movement in that book.
Nice. Best piece of wisdom you've ever received?
Don't make it worse.
Okay, that's a good one. Finish this sentence. One thing people need to do to increase their confidence and courage to actually be on a podcast is
do something new for the first time.
Yeah, that's a good one. Fast forward 100 years. What do you want your legacy to be?
A good father and husband.
I like it. Define yourself in one word.
Changing.
All right. Tell everybody who your ideal clients are and how they can connect with you.
You bet. Our ideal clients are funded startup founders, successful entrepreneurs, C-suite level executives. There's an application on the website, kitcaster.com, or you can email me direct if you don't mind me sharing my email address.
No, please.
Cool. It's Estes, ESTES, at kitcaster.com.
I love it. So a couple of things. I just want to share a couple of final thoughts. I think being a guest on a podcast is one of the greatest things you can do for your business. I love that there are companies like you out there, Ryan, that can actually do it for people, because finding the right podcast to be on and doing the work to actually get on that show is a lot of work. I know your team is always reaching out to me with great bios and pitches. I mean, it's really, really important. And the ability to take this 3-month arrangements and be on 10 podcasts to grow your credibility and match your credentials in today's world, I think is absolutely critical. And so I appreciate you sharing everything that you guys do, because I'm a business coach and my goal is to provide 1 billion plus people coaching around the world, get them thinking big, get them unstuck. And I love talking to people and guests like yours who are providing resources and services to get people unstuck and grow their businesses in a really big way. And to me, this is one of the greatest things that companies can do. So I appreciate you sharing all of your information. Ryan can be found at Kitcaster, KITCASTER.com. The more information, I'm a big provider of content, and I know you have stuff on your website. Think Community, you can go to my website and download my book and my 100-page ebook for free at johndwoskin.com. But I just want to thank everybody for tuning in. And Ryan, I want to thank you for being on the show. This was great. Any final words?
No, I really appreciate being here. Love your podcast. And thanks for being a great home for so many of our clients.
Yeah, well, it's great being a home for your clients. If anybody wants to get a hold of Ryan, kitcaster.com. And give your email one more time, Ryan.
It's Estes at kitcaster.com.
All right. Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate it, everybody. Thanks all.